Hello, this is the Assure model presentation for Group 8. Our group members are Mary Garcia, Erin Matola, Jill Schoonover, and Elizabeth Volpe. This presentation will provide an overview of our copyright lesson and how it uses each of the 6 components of the Assure model. This lesson was designed to teach copyright law for a group of 6th grade students and their teacher. The Assure model was used to ensure student learning and high levels of engagement among the students. Each of the 6 parts of the Assure model were utilized and will be described in detail in the following presentation. The first step in the Assure model is to analyze the learners. For this lesson, our target audience was a group of 6th grade students. This lesson is part of a collaboration with their teacher, Mrs. Stewart. The teacher had expressed that the students were a high-energy group of students who had a particular interest in sports and music. Both the teacher, Mrs. Stewart, and the students had little experience with copyright law and putting it in practice. The students do have basic computing skills. With the knowledge of how to cite properly and the key concepts of copyright, they will be ready to use digital tools in their learning. The group is a diverse group of learners. With the knowledge that they are high energy, strategies will need to be employed to ensure engagement in the lesson. There's also a varied reading level in the group, which spans from 3rd grade to 9th grade abilities. Multiple intelligences are present in the group of students. These intelligences include verbal linguistic, logical mathematical, visual spatial, body kinesthetic, musical, and interpersonal intrapersonal. The multiple intelligences and varied reading abilities will be addressed in our lesson. The first S in the Assure model is for state standards and objectives addressed in the lesson. In this lesson, ISTE standards for students 2C was addressed. The Texas State Standards for School Library Strand 1 was also addressed. The students' learning objectives that were addressed in the lesson were to have students be able to describe copyright law in their own words. Students were also expected to identify the 4 requirements to be considered for the fair use exception. Finally, students were asked to distinguish between what would be considered plagiarism and what showed proper citation. The second S in the Assure model stands for Select Strategies and Resources. Because the students had little or no experience with copyright, we employed a gradual release of responsibility model for our lesson in which we presented the content to the students in terms that they could understand, provided real-world examples of copyright that walked through how to identify if it was proper usage of copyright law, and a culminating activity to have students determine for themselves whether the scenario provided was legal use or not. The students could refer to their reference handouts during the lesson to help inform their learning. To allow for student engagement, a smart board was chosen as the appropriate resource to present the material. Student learning will be assessed using self-assessment rubrics, as well as a rubric for the teacher. These rubrics will cover the competencies listed in the objectives slide to identify mastery or the need to reteach a small group of students. The fourth step in the Assure model is utilize resources. During the lesson, a smart board was used to show the PowerPoint presentation to the students. Embedded in the PowerPoint were the definitions and real-world examples, which were carried out using the gradual release of responsibility. First, the terms were identified and presented both on the PowerPoint and on the student reference handout. The Weird Al example was presented in a teacher-guided format. The students were then asked to refer to their handouts to discuss the example as to whether or not they felt this was acceptable use. After this initial example, the students were broken up into groups to evaluate a potential copyright infringement case in which someone manipulated a sports logo for their school team. The groups discussed whether they thought this was a copyright violation or not. Finally, the students were given 5 scenarios and were asked to think about whether it was a copyright violation. The final step of the Assure model is for require learner participation. At the beginning of this lesson, we discussed why copyright law is important and how it is relevant to our lives as students and outside the classroom. Students were asked to refer to their handout for support throughout the presentation. Students were asked to participate in discussions in a whole group setting, first with the teacher-guided example, and then in a group setting for additional practice. At the end of the lesson, students were asked to demonstrate their learning through identifying examples of plagiarism and correct citation, as well as providing their own definitions of copyright. After the conclusion of the lesson, students were asked for their feedback on the lesson itself for the teacher and librarian to reflect upon. The final step of the ASSURE model is to evaluate and revise. To reflect on the lesson's effectiveness, student outcomes will be noted. These will come in the form of anecdotal reflections on student learning and engagement during the lesson. The final assessment product will also be reviewed to determine those who mastered the concepts and those who may need small group reteaching or additional practice. A review of the effectiveness of the lesson will also be done through student and teacher feedback on the lesson, as well as personal reflection. Thank you.